And welcome back once again to Memoirs of the Father. I am your host, the Father, Alex Burnham. I hope everyone is doing well today, as always, and I hope that that you come here in a good place and that you're excited to dig into what we're getting ready to dig into today. I've worked on this one for a while now, and I've written down lots of notes and I've reviewed it. And today we are going to discuss the dark side of cheerleading. This has been a different process for me compared to a lot of the other stuff that I've done because there are a lot of things that people know are not right. They know goes on. And I've had the unfortunate responsibility of holding a lot of people's secrets for a very long time. And the reality is that while filming this and while going over this, I've had to be reminded of a lot of things that I was aware of, and a lot of things that they're not easy. And they're either other people's stories, things I've seen personally. It's a lot, and I think it's made me come face to face with the fact that sometimes I sat back and I didn't do anything either, and it's been a lot to go through. But I do think that stuff that needs to be addressed, then people need to know about it, and it needs to be out there for people to have access to because you can't fix problems that you don't know exist. Um, so that's been a big one. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff today. I doubt that we're going to be able to encompass every single thing. Um, and I also want to shed some light on some certain things. Obviously, I'm going to talk about cheerleading as a sport and what that means. And you may think, well, how would that apply to the dark side? Well, it's going to be a little interesting for us because of the way that we're currently positioned and regulated. Um, Acknowledgement of sport would drastically change a lot of those things. But we're also going to look at varsity and the complaint of them being on a monopoly. I'm not going to get into all their numerous amount of lawsuits because it would take all day. But we're going to look at things like the culture. Lots of places have very different culture. We're going to look at drug use. We're going to look at the pressures in mental health. We're going to look at what some things, the financial strains, the pricing. I mean, the price of cheerleading is absolutely ridiculous right now. And, I think that that's preventing a lot of people from being able to do this. And there's a lot of things that we're going to get into. A lot of things that some of it's going to be a little tough. Some of it's going to be remindful. I think everybody's got a story. Some of the stuff we'll get into from mine, some will be my own personal stuff. And I have to also, sometimes I have to step back and look at, the way that I feel and the way that it was when I was going through it and my perception. Because, sometimes I could consider something wrong, but there are people that are in the midst of it that don't feel that it's that way. Or maybe sometimes I've misconstrued something because of the way that I'm looking and I'm viewing at it and I'm not being open to that. I think that that's a very real possibility too. Um, but obviously there's a lot of stuff that goes on. There's a lot of stuff that goes on everywhere and in everything. Um, but with ours, for the age group that we're going on, the stuff that we have to focus on and what this can do to you, it's a lot. Because I very rarely do most sports get the opportunity to be under the kind of pressure that we do. And if you don't think that that has a pretty big impact on a lot of different things and the way that our sport is structured, if you don't think that that also has an impact on people, then hopefully this video is getting ready to shed a lot of light on you. Some of these things that we're going to talk about are going to be uncomfortable. Some of them are going to be a little bit intense. But I'm going to try to be as open about everything that I can be. I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm not here to throw anybody under the bus. I'm probably not going to bring up specific names. You know who you are and you know what you have to answer for. And that's between you and God. So if you guys are ready. So we'll start off a little bit easy here. Let's go to the great debated sport of cheerleading. And cheerleading has pretty much been debated for as long as I can remember. When I first got in, and that was like, I can't even tell you how long it's been. I've been in here for right around 20 years. And even back then, people were fighting and arguing if cheerleading is a sport, and I'm sure that that's gone on and extended for a lot of time. Um, and there's lots of different viewpoints. Like there's some states that absolutely already recognize cheerleading as a sport? On a national level, are we recognized? The answer is no. And we're going to look into that a lot. So I specifically want to go back to this because this is something that gets referenced an awful lot. In 2010, there was a university, I believe that they were in Connecticut, but what they decided to do is that they were going to get rid of their volleyball program. And because of Title IX that exists, and it has existed for a long time, it essentially establishes equal opportunity for men and women in sports. And there's a lot more complexity to that, but that's one of the main objectives of that. So in doing this, eliminating volleyball has now eliminated a female sport. And they wanted to replace it with cheerleading and have cheerleading be their sport that they have replace volleyball. Obviously, the volleyball team sued, took it to court, and here's what they ultimately decided on, is that they could not consider cheerleading or define cheerleading as a sport under the NCAA regulations. And the reasons that they listed were season structure, a definitive and clear postseason, and clear and consistent rules across all of cheerleading. And you might say, like, well, we have all that, but let's look at it and break it down to why this would happen. So, like in the state of Kentucky, for instance, we have football. It's primarily a male sport, and typically only male. So you have to have an all-female sport to offset that. Primarily for most of the places, we have volleyball. Now, I know there's men's volleyball, but here in the state of Kentucky, it's primarily kept to volleyball and football are the counteractive of each other. You have men and women's baseball, basketball, softball. Those things all counteract each other. And then you have your co-ed sports where guys and girls can participate. So a guy and a girl, a co-ed sport, would not really fit into this because you're giving equal opportunity to both guys and girls. But equal opportunity does not necessarily just mean from a sporting perspective, from just having access to a sport. Because of these rules, they felt like our sport did not provide equal opportunity as volleyball or football or basketball that you would have from other sports. So the way that they've always defined it has never made me think that they did not think that cheerleading was a sport. They just didn't think that our sport met the definition of what they wanted their sport to be. So let's look at that and see how they got to this conclusion. So season structure. Let's look at this completely from the collegiate standpoint, because that's what this case was for, is for the NCAA college sport. Season structure. What is the collegiate season structure? There isn't one. It's nationals. You go to nationals. We have one competition. Nationals. How do you get there? You pay to go. Or you go to camp. You get a bid. Your bids are based off of how you performed last year. You go to camp. You pay. That's the structure. There is no structure. Versus volleyball, football, baseball, basketball, you're going to play lots of regular season games. You're going to play games. You're going to improve a ranking. You're going to improve that. And a lot of that builds into their postseason play. For us, we really just have the postseason. And it's, like I said, it's one competition. So we already don't provide the same amount of competitive athletic opportunities that other sports do. And that's a concern. Because how can it be equal if this team competes one time for 2.5 minutes versus this basketball team that's going to play 48 minutes and they're going to play 22 games a year? Or volleyball, you're going to play a lot. You're going to get more playing time. You're going to get more opportunities to compete. You're going to have more things to try to chase. And for them, that was a pretty definitive line. And it's kind of hard to argue with that because right now we don't have anything that's like that. Obviously that's why they created Stunt for that structure. But, I just feel like it'd be a really hard sell right now to separate a season. Like we couldn't do a 1v1 type thing, this team versus that team. Because nobody's going to care to come and watch 5-minute totals of 2 performances and then go home and leave. Like there's nothing in that, like that's stupid. It's foolish. Now if you have a bunch of teams there, that's a different story. But if you do that, then it eliminates the 1v1 structure. Their second point was that cheerleading does not have a defined postseason requirement. Now, what does that mean? Now, we have our national competition. But when it goes into postseason, let's look at the NCAA basketball. You play games all year long, and you build a strength of schedule, and you build your quality. From there, depending on how you did, you get seeded into your conference tournaments. The SEC, ACC, goes on and on and on. So the winner of the tournament, those conference tournaments, automatically receives a bid into the NCAA tournament. And then once they've done that, then they go and look at your strength of schedule to see who qualifies. They look at your wins and losses. It's a very complicated procedure, and it's very controversial too because it's a human decision. But there's a good chunk of teams that always make the tournament every year that did not win a championship to get in, and they're being judged based on their body of work throughout the year. So that's how they qualify for that. We don't have anything like that. Same thing with NCAA football. Basically the same thing. You play like 12 games, and then the hope is that you get into being selected to compete in the championship based on however many wins and losses that you do. And then if you win that, then obviously there's a whole another section for the college football tournament. And the college football tournament's rules are very, very weird, but obviously there's a very defined way. Like, you almost have to win out or very minimal losses to get in. And it used to be more complex when you were just voting on the top 2 teams who's going to be worthy to play in the national championship football game. But there is a structure to it. You understand what I'm saying? Like, there are clearly defined rules on how you can advance in the postseason. Obviously, we don't have anything like that because it's pretty much if you want to go and you have the money and you have the resources to go, you can go. Now, that is obviously going to tie more into the season structure. So in order for cheerleading to be considered a sport, we would have to restructure our season, and we would have to have a very clear and defined postseason and how you qualify for that. Pretty understandable things. I understand why they want to do that. They want to make sure it's understandable. They want to be able to justify things to people. And they want it to be a competitive event. And just allowing everybody to come, well, I don't think that that's a bad thing. From a sporting perspective, when you have other sports that don't allow everybody else to go, it's not like every team in NCAA can send their basketball team to compete in the basketball championship. It's not the way that it works. You'd have a 400 or 500 team tournament, and it would be ridiculous. I mean, I guess kind of in a way, because everybody's got to get beat out in the conference. Technically, we all have the opportunity to go if you win out, So it's not too much of a stretch, like I said, but we don't have anything that's very clearly defined as that, and we don't have the athletic opportunities. And then we're going to get to the big one, which I think is probably one of the more difficult challenges that we would face. It wants very clear rules and consistently throughout all of cheerleading, which we do not have. So let's look at the 2 biggest ones. We've got UCA, we've got NCAA. Those are your 2 biggest college nationals. I understand that there's other ones, but these are your 2 big ones. These are the ones that are prominently featured. These are the teams that you see all the time. But they have different sets of rules. The way the routines are structured are different. The way their routines are scored is different. Certain things carry different point values between the 2. They're not the same. NCAA has great stunts. I'm not even going to deny that. But obviously it's a lot more flashier. You get stuff for highlight passes, individual things. Very heavy focus on tumbling. Obviously there's no cheer. And then you flip over to UCA, which you have a 45-second cheer. A lot of the score sheet is geared towards a lot of synchronization in your skills, and then a big heavy focus on stunts and pyramids, stuff like that. So there's already 2 very clearly different styles of cheerleading just between the UCA brand and the NCAA brand, and I'm not even looking at the other ones that are out there that do exist. But if it's going to be a sport, we can't have that because there's not 2 different ways to play basketball. There's not 2 different ways to play football or volleyball or baseball. There's one. And that's what the sport is. It's the one. So those things prevent that from happening. So as you can already see from what I'm starting to gather here, is that in order to be a sport and to meet their definition of the sport, which we could do, we would ultimately have to change the entire structure of cheerleading. And varsity pretty much argued in this case that we weren't ready for that. Not that cheerleading is not a sport by their definition of this sport, and that we're not ready to progress to that point, was essentially the argument because they were called in to speak on the matter. And I know a lot of people were upset about them saying that, but you have to look at it from their perspective because varsity has essentially been at the forefront of making cheerleading what it is today. You may not like that answer, but it's not a lie, and it is the truth. They are the ones that put together the national competitions. They're the ones that have been pushing this. They're the ones that implement a whole lot of things that have made cheerleading what it is today and made it what a lot of people love. That's true. Now, am I sitting here saying that they're perfect and that everything that they've done is great and fantastic? No, it's not. But nobody else picked up the ball. They did. And that's specifically true from the collegiate standpoint. And you can make your argument with All Star that they bullied around and bought everybody up, but we'll get to that point later. But for right now, I feel like they had a right to make that stance because you can't just change things overnight. Not even they just change everything overnight. Like if they're restructuring certain things, they have to give you so much time in advance so that you can prepare because college teams build their whole teams based on what they're going to have to do or the style that they're going to have to do to meet this score sheet. Well, if you change everything, then you run into a problem here. And that problem is that the style that is created may not benefit your team, or you may have athletes that no longer fit into that structure and are no longer people that you would necessarily want to have on your team. You can cut them, but obviously you got to go, you got to recruit, you got to build, and these things take time. You cannot just flip a switch and it be automatic. It's not that simple. I don't care how great anybody is. It's not that simple to do. And I've been the victim of, division changes and all kinds of stuff like that. And it, even with the notice, it's still not difficult to do. It takes time to make those adjustments. It takes time to develop and figure out how you're going to work these things. So something like that would initially be bad. I mean, somebody would benefit from it, don't get me wrong. But as a whole, I think it would hurt us and it would take time for us to adjust. And you see that with a lot of other things that have happened throughout all of cheerleading. I don't think that I have to elaborate on that very much for people to understand that it's true. And then the other thing that I think clearly makes us not a sport and was argumented is that all sports' primary goal is the athletic endeavor. Basketball players are brought in to play basketball. Football players are brought in to play football, and that is their focus. Cheerleaders, in most places, are brought in to be supporters, to support other teams. Our mission is not our own team. That is something that would have to change. Because if we're going to be considered a sport, then we should be allowed the equal opportunity to focus on just our sport, not having to do all these extracurricular activities. And that's why I say cheerleading is a lot of times more than a sport because of what we have to do. Like, it's difficult to just look at, there are sporting aspects of it, but to say that we are solely just a sport, I think is wrong because of the way that you could change it, but then we're not cheerleaders. If you're not cheering, you're not a cheerleader. You're just something else. And there's not a word for what that something else is. And those are solid arguments. Like it's you understand that. It's very easy. You may not like it, but it's easy to understand, right? Like these are pretty simple things. And honestly, when I look at it, game day is probably the most effective way to make cheerleading a sport. And I know some people are going to hate that, but game day is pretty much like pretty universal. UCA, the NCAA game day, it's pretty much, and I understand there's different divisions and there's stuff like that, but I mean, really the rules and the standards of game day are the same across the board. So honestly, if we ever do get considered a sport, it very well may be a lot of like what game day is, and then allow us to still do our traditional stuff on the side, because you can do game day. Like, here's my big argument. So let's look at it. Like if you had to develop this postseason structure like an SEC, well, you've got Texas Tech, which is an NCAA school, and then you've got Kentucky, which is a UCA school. How do you decide which one of these score sheets or, whatever changes you make to the score sheet are going to favor one person more than it is the other? And you have to find a way for that to be fair. It's very, very hard to do. But with game day, you don't have to do that. You can just have them compete now, as is, and it would work. You understand what I'm saying? You don't have to change anything about what you're doing at your program. You don't have to change the type of people that we recruit, because everything that you're doing in game day is focused towards this one thing. It could work. Now, obviously, season structure, postseason, stuff like that, we'd have to find ways to make all that work. But for the big rule stuff, game day would obviously be the easiest one to implement and change. If you did something like they do with the gymnastic meets where you have all the schools in the conference meet together and go through some stuff like that and compete against each other, you could do it. I mean, without having to go through the big hassle of affecting everything with the rules. Like, you could do that and maybe keep the traditional thing the way that it is on the side and kind of just let it run. Like, that's entirely possible. It's entirely doable. And it really doesn't cross or break against any kind of ethics or anything like that. I don't think it would be concerning or alarming to anybody. But that is entirely a possibility. And like I said, someone out there is probably going to disagree with me on that. But that's my thing. So the truth is in that becoming a sport potentially has the ability to change everything that we love. And that's a hard thing to accept, is that in order to get what we want, we have to change what we are. And maybe that's the dark side. Because a lot of us want that respect, we want that recognition, we want those things. But I don't think that we've come to the conclusion yet that we have to change everything that we are in order to be that. So another thing that I want to look at here is, if the NCAA took over, what would some of these changes be, just outside of the competitive stuff that I've already talked about? Obviously, I've talked about the UCA NCAA score sheet is essentially gone. You're going to have to come up with something new, something that's going to benefit both. And like I said, it's going to change the styles. It's going to change the kind of people you recruit. It's going to change a whole lot of things. So that essentially is going to affect every single program in the country right off the bat. Just that alone. For NCAA, you don't have to be a full-time student. That will change. With the NCAA, that will change. Because you cannot be considered an active participant in any of the other sports unless you're a full-time 12-hour minimum student. So that's over with if this happens. Has to go away. Because they're not going to allow it to be any other way. Some of us that spend forever in cheerleading, that's not going to happen either. Most of the time, it's really hard to get 5 years in football, basketball, unless you redshirt for a year. So you're getting 4 years. And then you're out. That's it. You won't see a lot of people 28, 29 years old doing this anymore, which I don't have a problem with to begin with. But obviously, right now, the rule is if you compete, it's against you. So if you don't go out there at nationals, you don't compete, it doesn't count against your eligibility. That would not exist anymore. If you're on the team, it counts. Transfer somewhere, you still got the same amount of time. But a lot of schools have rules on like how long that they'll keep somebody right now anyway. This would be a lot more defined. And like I said, you wouldn't really be able to get away with that a lot. Because it's not uncommon for us to see. I've seen guys that come to a program, they spend 2 years sitting on the side trying to get better. And then once they get the opportunity, if they wanted it, they've got 5 years of eligibility yet. So at this point, you could be 25, 26 years old competing. That's going to come to an end. And those are just a couple things. Plus, if you have an all-girl team, now you have to come up with another sport to offset it and create equal opportunity because of the Title IX requirement, which I don't think is a bad thing, obviously, but the school's got to do that. So that's a whole nother team that's got to be funded. That's a whole nother part of the athletic department that has to pour revenue into. Your revenue. Everyone's revenue. And let's not act like a lot of schools get money, and a lot of schools get money to give athletes based on media right deals, which we currently do not have. And you'd have to find a way to do that and sell cheerleading and because Varsity gave the rights to their stuff away to Flow Sports because it's just too expensive to maintain on their own, and they needed content. I don't know how much they pay for that content, but all the streaming goes through there. You don't do it on their website. You can do it on their website, but it's all based on the Flow Sports stuff. You got to pay, and I think it's ridiculous how much they ask you to pay for that stuff right now as it is. With something like this, you would have to find a way to do all that. You'd have to find a way to get TV, to get media rights deals so that we could have money to fund, I'm like, oh, well, that's not fair. Listen, I'm going to tell you something right now. just a few months ago, University of Kentucky came out and said that they were going to give 60% of their funds to their basketball team, just their basketball team, which will have no more than 15 people on it. 60% of their funds will go towards that. Why? It generates so much revenue. Their media deals are great. They always sell out. They make a lot of money off basketball. But the other 40% is now going to go to football, women's basketball, baseball, softball. So this one team is going to encompass and inherit more money and more resources than what any of the other ones do combined. Is that right? Is it fair? It's up to the school's discretion to decide where the money goes. So just because we become a sport and just because they send us a certain amount of funding for certain things, that does not imply that we're going to get money for scholarships, because they're not required to give us any. That's the part that everybody seems to forget. Like, oh, if we do this, we'll get scholarships. That's not a guarantee. They don't have to give you a scholarship. They give it to the people that they want, the people that they need, but they're not required to give it to anybody. They may be required to do certain other things, but giving you money and funding certain things for your program is not a guarantee. So, yes, we could make cheerleading a sport, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would fix any of your problems. And that's the reality of that. You know, you look at states like, I believe Georgia, for high school, has cheerleading as a state, but they don't allow their kids to compete at nationals. And they have the right to do that because they recognize it as a state, a sport. And because it's a sport, they can dictate what they can and can't do. There's other sports that like that. Is it Ohio? I think Ohio recognizes a sport, but they're non-billed, so you're not allowed to do any stunning. Because if you do, then you had to take out a bigger insurance claim if you have a cheerleading squad versus having a spirit squad. So they're not allowed to stunt because it costs more money. Money that they don't have, or money that they don't want to allocate, that they don't want to spend. And then it comes into the whole deal. They don't want to create another sport to offset it. It becomes a whole deal, whole thing. And they have to do that because Title IX also applies to high school sports. Is that right? Is that fair? I don't know. Obviously, I wish that there was a way for everybody to be happy with it. The truth is that there's not. I like cheerleading currently the way that it is. I definitely think that it could be better. But I think that the way that we're currently going is trending in a much better direction than what this would. That this would be, I'm sure that it could work over time, but it would be chaos. And I think that it would potentially offset a lot of the progress that we've already made. So that's always going to be my take on it. And I try to keep that as simple as I can. I mean, we could talk about this all day long, just this one topic. But this is a part of the dark part of cheerleading. Even though, it's not malicious, it's not anything that's intentionally evil or anything like that. But it's a reality. And reality is not often pretty. And that's the case with this. So, like I said, we could debate on this all day long. But what I've said is true. These are facts. These are actual concerns. These are things that people would ask you. These are things that NCAA representatives, that people that are looking to make the sport, these are the arguments that they would make. And right now we currently don't have answers to those. Could we find them? Sure. Someone somewhere, I'm sure we'll figure something out. But for right now, it hasn't been. And that's one of the reasons why they do that. And like I said, it's not because they don't think that we're a sport. It's because we don't offer the same opportunities that other sports do. And that's really what it comes down to. So, like I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of more time on this. This is going to wrap up the episode for now. And we are going to shift next week and go over looking at some stuff for what a bad coach is, I think. Lots of stuff to cover with my dark side of the cheer. Like I said, if you want to, please continue to like, subscribe, share, retweet, repost, whatever it is to help me spread my content. I would greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on TikTok at AttackOnAlex64, same on Instagram. If you want to continue to watch more of my videos and posts and letting you guys know when stuff's going to come out. And like I said, I appreciate all your support as always. And I will see you guys next time on Memoirs of the Father. Goodbye and good night.